Welcome to Corwin's Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast with hosts Peter DeWitt and Michael Nelson. This podcast is from education leaders for education leaders. Every week, Peter, Mike, and our guests get together to share ideas, put research into practice, and ensure that every student is learning not by chance, but by design.
Michael, here is our, one of our bonus episodes for Leaders Coaching Leaders. And this was all your idea. So talk a little bit about it.
I'm a little bit of a geek, and this is relatively new for me, Peter. As you know, we've been working, we're almost to our year anniversary of working on these podcasts together. And so I do go back and listen to us, even though I don't necessarily care to listen to my own voice, which is a common feature for all of us that we have. I know you've said that about your voice as well. But as I go back and listen, I learn so much more after listening to the podcast, or when listening to the podcast a second or even third time. And so we have two seasons, a kind of a fall and a spring season of Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast. And I think we have some opportunities between the season to put maybe just a 2 to 5 minute piece from somebody's podcast to re-highlight them. And what you and I have talked about is, if we cluster 3 podcasts together, I think that we could develop a theme and interact with each other about that.
Yeah. And, we have 3 today. So we're not going to give all 3 away. You have to spend the whole time with us. But the first one is Tiffany Anderson, who is a superintendent who I admire, but you bring admiration to a whole new level where Tiffany is concerned. And I think I love the idea of the theme. It would really be interesting, too, to see if people react and make comments, whether it's on social media, whether it's on YouTube, about what they see the common theme to be as well. And I do like this idea because when you're engaged in the conversation, you're engaged in the conversation. You're listening to what people are saying. But when you're actually listening back to how the conversation went, you're just listening to it in a different way. So starting with Tiffany Anderson, how about you introduce this one?
Well, if viewers go back and will rewatch the whole Tiffany Anderson podcast, I embarrassingly gush the whole time, Peter. I'm just gushing over her leadership. And I don't know how many times I said, I'll go to Topeka and I would love to work with her because I understand how she gets all this stuff done, because she's somebody you want to be a part of the organization in which she's leading. I think she's phenomenal. But these 3 podcasts, I'll give just a little hint of this away. I think the theme is really it's about all kids, and we're going to come through that in different lenses with the 3 excerpts from the podcast. But Tiffany focuses on one particular student, and at this point in the podcast, I was really trying not to be a blubbering idiot. I was really trying to hold my emotions in, because it's a beautiful story, and it's a story that helps her keep her compass on true north of what it's all about. It's about the students.
I actually think you were very sweet when she was talking. I mean, I've known Tiffany for a little bit longer than you have, and I admire the work that she's doing. But when I say you brought it to a whole new level, it's just you both have that. You have a similar path in a way that you were both superintendents. She's a practicing one, and you were one for 14 years in the town that raised you. So it's where you grew up. So I think that admiration that you have is the whole new level, or what I thought was a whole nother level, just based on the fact that you understand how important the role of superintendent is, and you're amazed by the work that she's doing. So in this one, you asked a particular question. Do you want to just set that up a little bit before we press play?
I really wanted to know a student who's really impacted her as a leader. And oftentimes we hear about teachers that have impacted us, but I think it's an interesting twist to say, who's a student that's impacted you in your leadership journey?
Yep. Okay, so let's listen.
Picture yourself popularly known among staff members as the reliable go-to person who makes meaningful change happen. This is possible when you equip yourself with robust strategies and tools from Corwin's leadership workshops. Sign up today at corwin.com.
Is there a student story that resonates with you, that keeps you on your true north, that is always in your heart, of somebody you impacted that you could share with our listeners?
There is a student story, and I will share rather than someone that I've impacted, someone that impacted me, and really is the why behind what I do. And while all students represent our why, I'll try to make this as concise as possible. And I will say that it's not me; it's really us. It's we. It's the district. It's the teachers. It's all of us. No one. Principal or superintendent, and if they're listening, no one person can do this. And the sooner you realize that you can't do this, and I say this to new principals and the new superintendents who may have a hard time delegating and taking that ownership, the ownership has to come from everybody on the team. So no one person. So I get the opportunity to work alongside some amazing heroes and incredible principals and teachers that do this work, and students. So, but the story that I will share with you is really answers a question for many people, because I always wear scarves. And they often have a message for the day, whatever I'm wearing for that particular day. But that scarf started with a student, Rodney McAllister. If you Google his name, his story will come up. Rodney was previously a homeless student, joined Clark School, which is where my first and only principalship was, in St. Louis City. And one day in the spring, in fact, I just visited for his anniversary, as his teacher and I still visit, and this is 20-something years later. Rodney didn't come to school one day. And I will tell you, the day that you get a phone call in a school that's 100% poverty, and you get the question from officers asking, did all your students show up? And I can remember it like it was yesterday. Officer Prothero Middleton called and wanted to know if all of our students showed up. My parent liaison, Joanne Carmen, went through the building, and within seconds she knew who was absent, and Rodney was absent. Within an hour of that time, we learned that Rodney had been mauled to death by dogs across the street from the school in Ivory Perry Park. Ivory Perry, so that you know, is a former civil rights leader from many years ago. I asked my parents, didn't you hear screaming? And they said, yes. Of course, Doc, we heard screaming. It happened all night. If you Google this story, you will also see that in the news reports. They said it wouldn't stop. And I asked, why didn't you open the door? And they responded with, how dare you judge us? When we call the police, they may or may not come. When we hear gunshots, we hide under the bed. When we hear screaming, we close our blinds and we hope that it's not us that's next. So how dare you judge us from where you live of why we didn't open the door? Over the course of the coming weeks, we have a memorial. So if you ever go to St. Louis, please visit Ivory Perry Park. There's a large concrete memorial, all of the handprints from the students and myself with our names below them, and a very large tree in the middle of that. And it's right outside of the apartment that his mother lived in, who, had she not been on drugs and awake, she would have seen and heard him. And so later within that year, over the course of the weeks, I began receiving scarves. And the first one was a Save the Children scarf. It's an organization that creates scarves. And it was a note that said, Save the Children. And then I got the second one. That year, I started teaching in a classroom next to Rodney's classroom. And I will tell you, so I was teacher and principal that year as well. And Mr. Ellery Clark, his amazing teacher, and I shepherded those students at Clark School, as did all of our teachers. Ever since then, I collect scarves because it reminds me what we do or don't do is life or death for our students and for the community. When people only look out for themselves, then the entire community is at risk. That's the one teacher in the classroom that's by herself. That's the one parent in the community. That's the student that's playing at the park that may not have structures to support them. This is why it's so important. When I say schools are the center of the community and we do this work, it's important to recognize that. because only through collective capacity and building collective capacity of the community can you truly improve school outcomes, but ultimately improve the community in which you have the privilege to live and serve. If I come to work without a scarf, believe me, I have scarves in my glove compartment, in my everywhere, because it reminds me of Rodney. So that's the student. There are many student stories, but that student changed what we did and how we served. I asked my staff, did we do enough? And they said yes. And I said, no, we didn't. Because hotline, that's not enough. So we added a social worker, increased our own social worker. So in our school, we had our own social worker, and we did it by me teaching in a classroom and increasing class sizes, creatively putting washer and dryers. Parents could, in the school, parents could wash laundry for one load a day as long as they volunteered 1 hour in exchange in the classroom, and all kinds of other ways to truly address the social determinants of health. And we still do many of those things today.
She's pretty phenomenal. But what she said about a student and the impact of Rodney, the experience that she had, and what we do and what we don't do has an impact in the culture in which we're trying to create for all students. Peter, she's a remarkable leader.
She is. I enjoy talking to her a lot because she's impactful with her words, and that she's just doing so much work to make sure that every student is feeling included and successful. I think for me, when I reheard that part of the podcast, is that there are so many people that don't know really what's going on in schools with kids. They have their own perception based on their family and sending their kids to school. And even my own family, I'm the youngest of 5. We have our perception of what school looks like, right? And being that I work in schools and was a teacher and principal, I would share some of the stories, not by name, but share some of the stories of what was happening with students. And there were so many people that just don't know that kind of thing. And I think of Jonathan Kozol's work on savage inequalities in the 1990s. And there are just so many of those student stories, so many people that need a fair shot when they're coming into our school. And there are people like Tiffany Anderson who are doing that work. And even though I don't work in her school, I'm not one of her teachers, I'm not one of her principals, I'm certainly grateful for the work she does.
Right. Many people listen to this and they don't actually see the video portion of it. This one's worth to see the video portion of it. When she speaks, you can tell it's with her whole heart and soul. And as she was talking about the experience with Rodney, she was clutching her scarf the whole time. So as you watch this several times, you start to see those things, and that tells me it's at her core, it's at her heart that she doesn't want another child to experience this. She wants to create communities that are in the collective, as she kind of ended her conversation about that experience and the student that impacted her.
Yeah. So our next one are 2 people that we know. They're both Corwin authors. So we've got Sonja Hollins-Alexander and we have Nicole Law. And they are talking about collective equity, which is one of their books. But we asked them to focus on something pretty specific. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And this podcast, when I listened to it, it took me from listening to the core, the foundation that Tiffany Anderson spoke of. They both Nicole and Sonja really move into here's the driving, here's how we can take this experience that maybe Dr. Anderson have and move it into practice. And the excerpt the portion of this podcast that we chose, you're going to hear Nicole really describe equity and define equity. And the way in which she did it and her intonation in the words that she used really, Peter, they impacted my head and heart as I was, we've all studied equity. We all want to build equitable systems for our students and our staff. She took it and did a beautiful job in 3 minutes. So I think this excerpt's maybe 3 or 4 minutes, and it's a powerful one.
Right.
Yeah, short and sweet. It means giving individuals, regardless of their dimensions of identity, what they need to thrive. Thrive in learning communities in terms of extracurricular, in terms of classroom instruction, in terms of being a part of that school culture. And I was just with a school team today from Iowa, and I thought about a goal. I've been thinking about a goal, an equity goal, if I were still in a school, if I were assistant superintendent or superintendent, that it would be short and sweet. It would be that every scholar has an opportunity to a rigorous, relevant, and relational experience within our school community. And then creating those measures to be able to say, all right, is it rigorous? And how do we know? Is it relevant to the needs of that individual? And how do we know? And then are we relational with these scholars, their families? And how do we know? And so that is definitely my definition of equity. Giving individuals what they need, scholars especially, to thrive within the learning community.
So I have one more question for you, Nicole, before I move on to Sonja with the unlearning question. Sorry. So why do you think that's so hard for people? Because I feel like we've been in a lot of conversations. Mike and I have had a lot of conversations. And when we're doing collaborative inquiry with school teams or leaders or whatever, tier one instruction comes up as one of the main goals for so many school leaders and teachers. And then we start talking about differentiated instruction. Once again, I think that's a word. I think that those are two words that people use all the time, but they don't know the meaning behind. Why do you think giving kids what they need is so difficult?
Well, one, I believe that we have created schools that are a one size fits all.
Mm.
And so that's why when we talk about differentiation and other kind of buzz terms, that it is really, difficult to think about equity, giving someone what they need in order to thrive. And when we think about what those needs might be, one, we might not be developed to provide those opportunities to target needs for one to thrive. And two, we might not have that mindset that's needed. Oftentimes, we hold mindsets that, in schools especially, that this is the way we do things in our schools, and there needs to be scholars that acquiesce.
Mhm.
That's hard for me to say.
Mhm.
Well, what do you think of her definition of equity, Peter?
I think she's, absolutely spot on. And the hard part is equity has become one of those politically charged words, unfortunately, and we're getting away from the true meaning of that. It's everybody deserves the opportunity within schools. One of the podcast interviews that we're going to have coming out in the new season is somebody you and I recorded an interview with, a conversation with yesterday, which is Tim Schreiber. And when we think about equity and inclusion, there should be no downside to that. And that's exactly what Nicole is focusing on.
Yeah. Thrive. I just kept hearing that word over and over again. Thrive, thrive, thrive. So I want each and every student to be able to thrive, and um, that makes sense. And, as you think through Dr. Anderson to Nicole's definition, there's a definite through line about that.
So we have one more, and people probably, if they saw really quick, they saw who it was probably going to be, but it's our friend Tom Guskey, somebody that he for me has just been such a great mentor over the years, and he's somebody you and I both admire quite a bit. That's a cool thing about this, Michael, is that we get to talk to people that we can learn from. I mean, just think about the two so far that we've seen, right? We've got Tiffany Anderson and we've got Sonja and Nicole, and we get to have these conversations that are recorded that are going to be out there forever. And we get to learn. People will ask about what it's like to do the podcast and stuff. I always explain that I'm going in with a learner's mindset because I have this incredible opportunity to not only learn from you with the questions you ask, because you have a very different perspective than I do, but it's also, we get to have an opportunity to talk to these people who are doing amazing work, whether it's within school systems, whether it's through the books and facilitating workshops, or like Tom, somebody who has been at the very beginning of research around self-efficacy and collective efficacy. I mean, he's been a part of that research since the early 80s. He's known widely for grading and assessment, but I always get to pick his brain around things like self-efficacy, which he has just this deep level of knowledge. And if that's not enough, Benjamin Bloom was his doctoral chair. Like, who gets to say that Benjamin Bloom was, somebody that was his mentor? That's just amazing. So in this part of it, you really appreciated how Tom actually looked at grading through what kind of lens?
Right. This is the shortest of the video clips, and I think Tom has the ability to be incredibly succinct in when he speaks. And if you think of Dr. Anderson and the story that she told, and you think of Nicole and building equitable systems, we do need to provide feedback to students about their work. But it's not tied to them personally. It's tied to their performance. And so I believe our listeners will appreciate his words. So let's listen.
Point, Peter, where this can get confusing. For example, in many places around the country, and we find especially in some of the Canadian provinces, they define their learning goals based upon content and process.
Okay.
And so content is supposed to be all the stuff you're expected to learn, and then process is supposed to be the skills of which you apply that content. But again, if you go back historically to the early work of Benjamin Bloom, when he was developing taxonomy, and again, Bloom was taught by Ralph Tyler. Tyler was his advisor and his mentor. They said that it's really impossible to separate those two. That that when they were developing the taxonomy, they say with any content, you always have to think of what you want students to do with that content. And so you can't just know it, which is giving it back to the teacher the same way the teacher gave it to you, repeating or memorizing. And that would be good. That's necessary in a lot of contexts, but that would just be the beginning. That you might want students to be able to explain it in their own words, to be able to recognize examples of it, or see when it's used appropriately, inappropriate. That's more than just knowing it. That's moving up to what they call comprehension. Do you want them to be able to use it in new different contexts, come up with their own examples, to transfer it to other areas that we refer to as application? More complicated still, do you want to be able to pick it apart, to look at different components that it contributes to the whole, compare and contrast, that we refer to as analysis? Do you want them to combine it in new and different ways, to see how what we're studying in math is related to science, or how science has its basis in math, that we refer to as synthesis? And then beyond that, do you want them to think about what this contributes to society? What are the moral implications of these things? Are there implications for what we should be doing to develop as a race of people and a society overall?
Couple of things. Number one, I'm so thankful that you had the idea to do this, to put these together, because I will move on to what's the next interview that we've got to do. And it gave me the opportunity to relearn and rehear and all of those things. So thank you for that, because I have a great life. I get to come work with you and interview people like Tiffany and Sonja and Nicole and Tom. That to me is amazing. I will say that I'm going to give those watching the YouTube version a little insight into a blooper, because I took over the responsibility of recording these. So you really were a part of that interview. It's just that I'm new to this Zoom thing, Mike. I haven't been playing with it for very long. So I didn't know how to actually click the link or click the thing that shows that all three of us are there at the same time. That's why they saw Tom. And then every time I was going, they would like see my face. So there's a little bit of a blooper there. I think it was after that one of our teammates, Morgan Fox, said, Peter, there's something you need to check. So all three people are on the screen at the same time. So I'm sorry, because you weren't on that screen, but you really were a part of that podcast.
It was great. Tom is pretty phenomenal. And the way he describes all the things that he was going through. And he's just so calming. So, sometimes, grades and standards, they're emotional subjects. And we all know that we've probably had many community meetings, individual meetings with parents and staff around this issue. And he just really takes you through each one. And by the way, let me bring up Benjamin Bloom. And I'm like, okay, yeah, pretty phenomenal. So yes, it was fun putting all three of these together, very different styles. But we do think there's a through line of students and student learning and for all.
Well, Michael, I am going to say thank you once again, because you have amazing ideas, and I would have never thought to, do a couple of bonus episodes, bringing a few different of these interviews together. So thank you for doing this. It's nice to reflect on the work that we've done together over the past year when it comes to the podcast. So I'm grateful for that. So, but I look forward to the next season too. So far we have a pretty awesome season that we're building for next season, but it's just really good doing these interviews with you, Michael.
It is great, Peter. I enjoy it as well. And yes, next spring season for our listeners, it's going to be a great one for sure.
So as always, thank you for joining us, especially for these bonus episodes. Let us know what you think. Actually, this is new for us. Mike contacted me and said, hey, what do you think? And we've done a couple so far. So what do you think of these? Give us some feedback. And we appreciate that you would take the time to listen to the Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast. Michael, until next time, it was good to see you.
Good to see you, Peter. Thank you.